In episode 29, titled 3.1 Tailor Findings for Audiences, Technical versus Non-Technical, Internal versus External, tailoring is treated as a professional communication skill that protects accuracy rather than a cosmetic rewrite.
The same analysis can be understood as clear evidence by one group and as confusing noise by another, even when both groups are smart and motivated.
Tailoring bridges that gap by translating findings into language, structure, and context that match how the audience makes decisions and what they are accountable for. Done well, it increases adoption because the audience feels the message was built for them, not dumped on them. Done poorly, it can create mistrust, not because the data is wrong, but because the audience cannot see how it connects to their reality.
Tailoring is best understood as clarity, not dumbing down, because the goal is to preserve meaning while removing avoidable friction.
Technical and non-technical audiences both deserve precision, but they do not always need the same level of implementation detail to act correctly. Clarity means choosing the right level of abstraction, so the audience sees the signal, the implications, and the limits without being forced to decode unfamiliar terms. In practice, a tailored message also reduces error because audiences make fewer incorrect assumptions when the content is presented in a form they can interpret quickly. A useful mental model is that tailoring adjusts the lens, not the underlying scene, so the same truth remains intact while the view becomes usable. A reliable starting point is the decision the audience needs to make, because decisions determine which details are relevant and which are distracting.
A senior leader deciding whether to pause a product launch needs different information than an engineering lead deciding whether to roll back a change, even if both rely on the same incident data.
Decision-first communication makes the stakes explicit, such as whether the choice affects revenue, customer trust, compliance obligations, or operational stability.
It also helps define what enough evidence looks like, because some decisions require high confidence, while others can move forward on directional signals with a clear follow-up plan.
When the decision is named early, the audience can listen for what matters rather than guessing what the analysis is trying to prove.
Vocabulary should be adjusted based on technical depth and familiarity, because even accurate jargon can create distance and misunderstanding when it is not shared. A technical audience may interpret terms like false positive, baseline drift, or data lineage as precise concepts, while a non-technical audience may hear them as vague warnings that sound like excuses. Tailoring vocabulary does not mean removing technical content. It means choosing words that map to what the audience already knows, and then introducing new terms only when they are necessary for correctness. When an acronym is unavoidable, the first mention benefits from being spoken clearly, such as Key Performance Indicator, KPI, or Personally Identifiable Information, PII, so the listener is not forced to decode it midstream. After that foundation is set, the message can use fewer definitions and more momentum, which keeps attention on the finding rather than on translation. Examples are most effective when they match the listener's daily reality, because people evaluate claims by comparing them to what they see in their work. An engineer may relate to an example framed as a deployment window, a service dependency, or a specific failure mode, while a finance leader may relate to an example framed as forecasting variance, chargeback risk, or margin impact. When examples align with real workflows, they make abstract measurement issues concrete, like explaining why a metric moved because a population changed rather than because behavior changed. Good examples also help set boundaries, showing what the data supports and what it does not, which reduces overinterpretation. A practical sign of a strong example is that the audience can retell it in their own words without losing the point. Uncertainty should be handled directly by stating confidence and limits plainly, because uncertainty is not a weakness when it is framed as part of responsible analysis. Confidence can be explained in everyday terms, such as whether the pattern appears consistently across regions, whether missing values cluster in a way that biases the result, or whether multiple independent signals agree. Limits should be stated as constraints on interpretation, like incomplete logging during a time window, a known sampling gap, or a definition change that makes week-over-week comparisons imperfect. The aim is to prevent false certainty while still supporting action, since many decisions can move forward when uncertainty is bounded and the next verification step is clear. When uncertainty is explained calmly and concretely, trust increases because the audience sees the analyst is protecting them from overclaiming. Internal detail should be separated from external messaging needs, because internal audiences often need diagnostic depth, while external audiences often need stable, carefully scoped statements. Internally, details like event timelines, affected subsystems, detection gaps, and specific mitigations can guide corrective action and prevent recurrence. Externally, the goal is often to communicate impact, remediation status, and what affected parties need to know without exposing unnecessary internal mechanics that could confuse customers or create additional risk. This separation does not imply hiding information. It implies aligning detail with purpose and responsibility. When internal and external messages are mixed, the result can be both ineffective internally and risky externally, because the wrong people hear the wrong level of specificity. Sensitive disclosures require special care outside the organization because the audience's rights and needs must be balanced against security, privacy, and legal considerations. External communication should avoid sharing details that could enable follow-on attacks, such as precise control gaps, internal host names, unpatched versions, or step-by-step descriptions of weaknesses. It should also avoid speculating about root cause or attributing blame before facts are verified, because premature statements can become permanent records that are hard to correct later. Even seemingly small details, like exact timestamps or narrowly described attack paths, can provide adversaries with useful information about defenses and response speed. A disciplined message focuses on what is known, what is being done, what may be affected, and where updates will come from, while leaving sensitive operational detail for controlled internal channels. Narrative structure helps audiences absorb findings, especially when it moves from problem to impact in a way that matches how humans process risk. The problem can be framed as a measurable observation, such as a sudden metric change, an anomaly in event volume, or a mismatch between two systems that should agree. Impact then explains what the observation means in operational, financial, or customer terms, such as degraded service, incorrect billing risk, or delayed reporting. The narrative should also connect cause to effect carefully, distinguishing between correlation and confirmed mechanism, so the message stays defensible if challenged. When the story is coherent, the audience remembers it, and when they remember it, they are more likely to act on it appropriately. A breach metric scenario is a strong practice case because it forces two versions of the same truth, one for technical responders and one for non-technical decision makers. For a technical audience, the message can center on detection and response performance, such as mean time to detect, MTTD, and mean time to respond, MTTR, what data sources supported detection, and where telemetry was incomplete. For a non-technical audience, the same facts can be translated into impact-focused language, such as how quickly the organization noticed abnormal activity, how quickly containment occurred, and what confidence exists that the issue is controlled. Both versions should keep definitions stable because time to detect must mean the same thing even when phrased differently. The tailoring changes the framing and emphasis, not the underlying numbers or what they imply. Technical appendices can remain verbal by summarizing key evidence in a structured way, so the audience gets credibility without being buried in raw detail. Key evidence might include which logs confirmed the timeline, what system events corroborated each other, and what validation checks reduce the chance of false positives. In spoken form, this works best when evidence is described as a chain, where each link supports the next, rather than as a scattered set of facts. The audience does not need every artifact to trust the result, but it does need enough to believe the analysis is grounded in repeatable observations. When evidence is summarized clearly, technical listeners can spot gaps quickly, and non-technical listeners can feel confidence that the message is not guesswork. Jargon should be watched closely because it often creates distance and confusion, even when the speaker intends it as a shortcut. Words like ingestion, schema drift, impeditant, or exfiltration can be precise for some audiences and opaque for others, and the danger is that opacity encourages misinterpretation. A message heavy with jargon can also sound defensive, as if complexity is being used to avoid accountability, which damages adoption even when the analysis is solid. Tailoring replaces jargon with plain equivalence when possible, and when jargon is necessary, it anchors the term to a concrete example so meaning is shared. The objective is not to remove technical truth, but to ensure the audience hears the truth rather than the vocabulary. Follow-up is easier when space is left for questions and clarifications, because tailoring is a two-way process rather than a one-time broadcast. Space can be created by pausing after the core takeaway, by explicitly noting what is known versus still being validated, and by acknowledging what additional detail exists if the audience needs it. This posture invites the audience to surface constraints, such as a decision deadline, a compliance obligation, or a risk tolerance that the analyst may not have known at the start. It also helps reveal misunderstandings early, because questions often expose which terms or assumptions landed incorrectly. When questions are welcomed, the result is a shared understanding that travels farther than a perfectly written monologue. A three-layer message template is a practical recall tool because it helps build consistency across audiences while still allowing tailoring. The first layer is the headline, which states the finding in one clear sentence tied to a decision, so the listener knows what matters immediately. The second layer is the support, which gives just enough evidence, scope, and definition to show the headline is grounded and to prevent misinterpretation. The third layer is the boundary, which states limits, uncertainty, and what would change the interpretation, so confidence is honest and defensible. When these layers are used consistently, technical audiences can ask for deeper detail without losing the main point, and non-technical audiences can act without being forced into implementation complexity. The conclusion of episode 29 assigns a single practice that fits real work. Take one existing finding and rewrite it for a different audience this week, keeping the facts identical while changing framing, vocabulary, and examples. The rewrite should begin with the decision the new audience must make, then express the finding with definitions that match that audience's familiarity and constraints. It should include a plain statement of confidence and limits, and it should separate what is safe for internal circulation from what would be appropriate externally if the situation required it. The purpose is to build the habit that tailoring is a precision skill, not a simplification trick, because precision is what protects trust. Over time, that habit makes analysis more influential, since the same evidence can land correctly in many rooms without changing what is true. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.